Hello, my name is Jason Clark. This is the Snakes Are Us TV podcast, episode number 19. And tonight we were talking about cold. Cold, and it is cold. It is cold in here, believe it or not. I didn't turn the heat on like I should have in this building, and I should have worn a jacket tonight. But I think this will be interesting topic. You know, the last we've done a couple episodes recently. The last one we did was just entitled 2024, which was basically just kind of going over what we did in 2024. And then we did a couple episodes with my daughter for Christmas, both of my daughters for Christmas. And so this one's getting back to strictly about reptiles, which I think is really cool. And we're going to be talking about some misconceptions that I get all the time about reptiles and cold weather and temperature in general. So I think this is interesting because when I was thinking about what to talk about, so typically when I come up with a topic to do on this podcast, this is pretty funny. It shows how unprofessional this is I don't come up with like a whole thing to talk about. What I do is I'll have like a topic pop into my head, cold, like this one, because it was cold. And I was like, yeah, my reptiles, I got to make sure they're not cold, make sure they're, the temperatures where I said, I can talk about that on the podcast. And then that's as far as it went. Then I made the thumbnail for the video for this episode. And that's about as far as it went. So I did go and try to think of some things a few minutes ago, right before I started this, of, well, what specifically can we talk about? And so I did come up with some ideas and was reminded of some things I kind of forgot. So I think this is going to be interesting. And it may be, even if you are a reptile person, I'm hoping that a couple of things I cover tonight, I'm hoping I cover some things that you didn't know about reptiles and temperature-related things. So I hope this is good for everybody. So thank you guys for joining me. Again, this is episode number 19 of the Snakes Are Us TV podcast. I am your host, Jason Clark. And so cold, when it comes to cold, and I've mentioned this before, it's not my favorite time of year. I don't like it being cold. I like to wear a t-shirt and shorts. I like the green leaves on the trees. I like it staying dark till almost 10 p.m. I like summertime. Summertime's my favorite. Even though I'm hot nature, I get hot, I sweat. But like I said, I hate cold so much that I don't complain even when it's really hot outside. So anyway, so we've got some buildings here on the property that we keep our reptiles in, and we have to heat them because they can get cold. And I mentioned before, we heat those with propane because if we have a winter storm or something here, and the power goes out, well, the reptiles have to stay at a certain temperature, so we heat that with propane, and that way we don't ever have to worry about anything with them getting too cold. So when the power does go out, if I need to get warm, me and the kids will go down to the snake building and be perfectly fine there. Now we also heat the reptile building with electricity. In addition to propane heaters, we also have electric heaters and some other forms of heat as well, because different reptiles require different temperatures. So we try to heat our overall building at a temperature to where all the reptiles can at least be comfortable. But then some of the reptiles we have in there actually have to be a little bit more comfortable than that. So we have different ways of heating them. Now, I remember when I was a kid, one thing that was really popular, and you don't really see these in pet stores today, I don't know if they've just stopped selling them or what, but whatever it is, I think it's a good thing they've stopped selling them, was these. It looked like a fake rock. It was called a heat rock, a fake rock. And you basically plug it up and sit it in the aquarium or terrarium with your lizard or snake or whatever, and it heats up. And your lizard gets on this, or your snake, and would warm up on this rock, and it seemed kind of so natural because they're sunning on rocks in nature. The problem with this is the temperature was not very well regulated, and it could cause, severe burns on the belly of the lizard or the snake. So, kind of over the years, people have gotten away from using that because they're not good. But one thing that has kind of replaced that are these heat mats, and basically they kind of stick to the aquarium, and you can stick them on the outside of the aquarium, plug them up underneath it, and so then you've got the heat pad, then the glass, the aquarium, then you've got all the substrate on top of that, and then you can also actually stick them to the side of the aquarium, so it can kind of radiate heat to the side where the animal's not laying on it. And then these can also be regulated by thermostats that you can buy in the reptile industry now. And we're going to get to some cool stuff here. I'm just kind of going over some basics. And if you're into reptiles, you already know all this stuff. But if you're not into reptiles, you have no idea this stuff even exists. Then there's also what we call, you see the heat lamps. If you ever raise, chickens, baby chicks, you get one of those big dome heat lamps, and you've got one of those red lights, that emit heat, an incandescent bulb, I think is what it's called. And you can use those for reptiles sometimes, depending on the reptile and how the setup is. But one thing that I prefer to use over a heat bulb is a ceramic heater. A ceramic heater, they're pretty cool. They come in different wattages, just like light bulbs, and they screw into a light socket, but they don't emit light. It just emits heat. And so you can have this on the lizard or snake and not have to worry about it not having heat when you turn the light off at night. It's still emitting heat, and you don't have a bright light on in your bedroom with your bearded dragon. So those are cool. And then the other thing that is really popular now, and that we actually use some of this here, is heat tape. Heat tape comes in basically a roll, and it attaches to the bottom or to the side of the enclosure, and that attaches to a thermostat, which you can control the temperature, and it warms up it's kind of like a little heat mat, warms up a certain area of the enclosure. So even though we're heating the whole building with propane, some snakes need a little bit more warmth, can crawl back to the back of the enclosure and lay on that where that heat tape is to get a little bit warmer. So a lot of different ways of keeping reptiles warm. But that's a big misconception, is about reptiles and heat and reptiles and cold. What I mean by that is, I've often said you can probably kill a snake quicker with heat than you can cold. People think snakes like it hot. And for the most part, generally speaking, they do not. I tell people, like here in Georgia where I live, and people are worried about snakes being out in their yard and seeing a venomous snake in their yard. And I'll tell them, snakes kind of like the weather the way you like the weather. If it's really hot, it's too hot to go outside now. Let's stay in the house. This evening when it cools off, we'll go outside. The same thing snakes are thinking. People think, the dog days of summer when it's so hot and the snakes are out moving. Well, when it's really hot out, we don't see a lot of snakes at all. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them will actually become nocturnal. Some species, not all, but some species become nocturnal because it's too hot in the daytime. They'll just become active, more just at night. So turn my phone off there. So they just become active, at night a lot, except for the species like black racers who are only active in the daytime. They're diurnal, which means, active in the daytime. But anyway, speaking of keeping my reptiles warm, I had an incident several years ago where I drove my truck and my reptile trailer from Georgia all the way to Pennsylvania with, 30 plus reptiles in it, mostly snakes, a couple alligators. And I did this in February. Now, the reptile trailer I've got is heated, and it runs off of, it also runs off of propane, and the heating element runs off of electricity, which is powered by batteries in the trailer. So I can drive this trailer in the wintertime and still have it heated for the reptiles in the trailer as we're going down the road. Well, I actually have this. Now, and like I said, when I do this podcast, I try not to show a lot of stuff on the podcast because if you're watching this on YouTube, okay, then you can see what I'm talking about. But if you're not watching this on YouTube and you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to your podcast, then you're like, what is he talking about right now? But so I try not to do that, but I am going to show something really quick because to kind of give you guys who are watching a visual of this. My truck is right here. I have a Ford F-350, and I saw this one day. I was like, that is exactly like my truck. And so I just went, and the company who did the logos on my truck, I said, hey, can you do that on my other truck? He said, you have two trucks? I said, yeah, I've got two trucks. One's not as big as the other one, though. And so they made this logo for me, which is actually really cool that I think. So, let me turn the volume down on this thing right here. So anyway, I think this is really cool. So this is my little model of my truck with my snake logos on it here. And hang on, it gets cooler. This is our Reptile trailer. Now, I have a 32-foot enclosed trailer, and this is a scale model replica of it, okay? And so if you can imagine this big old trailer going down the road holding 30-plus animals, reptiles in here. Now, this has display cages inside. When you walk through there in display cages, well, those display cages are not where we keep the reptiles when we're going down the road. They actually come out of those cages and go into transport boxes that we transport them in that are much safer for transport. But anyway, so one day, this was back in February, several years ago. This was years ago, and I'm driving to Pennsylvania. And what I decided to do, I actually left a day early because there was an ice storm here in Georgia. And, people make fun of us here in the South that we can't drive in the snow. I think most people here in Georgia can drive in the snow. But what we get a lot here is not so much snow as we get ice. We have a lot of ice here. And nobody can drive in ice, okay? I mean, unless you have, maybe chains or something on your tires, and that's not real common here to have that. So it's not that we can't drive in it, it's that we don't have the proper equipment to drive on a sheet of ice, typically. So there was a warning coming with an ice storm in Atlanta, and I decided to leave a day early. I drive through it with the snakes in the trailer, and I start going north. And thank God I did. Once I got north of Atlanta, there was a huge store, this was years ago, you can look it up, where all downtown Atlanta was shut down, and people abandoned their cars on the interstate even. I mean, because it was just gridlock, you couldn't do anything. So pretty amazing. So anyway, I made it up to Virginia, and I decided, because I left late, I was like, I can't drive all night, I'm tired. So I decided to get a hotel, and I remember the temperature was -4, and some of you are like -4. That's nothing. Well, when you're from Georgia, -4 is a lot. I was talking to my friend Kyle tonight, and we're talking about the podcast, what I was going to talk about, and I mentioned that I was in that -4 weather. He said, man, what does it feel like to be in -4 weather? I said, I don't know. I guess when you get that cold, it all feels the same. You're just numb. So I can't imagine -40 or -50. I can't even imagine that. But anyway, I make it to a hotel in Virginia, and I decide I'm afraid that if I just leave the reptiles in the trailer, that what if the heat malfunctions? What if I run out of propane? What if anything happens? If any little tiny thing happens and the heat shuts off for an hour even, everything in there is dead. So I was like, I can't have that, So I get a luggage cart. Yeah, I get a luggage cart. And after I get my room, and then I go in the side door of the hotel with a luggage cart stacked with these boxes, and I take them in my hotel room for the night. And so I had to worry about it. So anyway, I come back out the next day, I load the animals up, and I go on to Pennsylvania, and I do the show there I was going to go do. Well, after this event is over, I'm there for like a week and a half, okay? I pack the animals up, and I've got my family now is in the vehicle with me. They actually flew up there a few days later and met me, and so they're riding back with me. I actually have a couple of volunteers in the truck with me as well, and Kayla and Sedan. And so, Kelsey and Sedan, I'm sorry. So they're in the truck with me. We're all riding back, and my daughters are in there with me. And on the way back, we get back into Virginia somewhere, and there was a pretty bad snowstorm, and we're on the interstate, and we're all in this truck, and they shut the interstate down, just shut down. And so we finally just have to sit here. Luckily, I had plenty of fuel in the truck. And we're just sitting here with the truck idling in traffic, parked for probably an hour and a half. I mean, it was just miserable. And finally, they started to move. And then as we moved, we started going down this hill. Then I realized why they had shut the interstate down. I'm on the interstate, and there's 3 lanes of traffic, okay? 3 lanes of traffic, and I am in the center lane. And there's some 18-wheelers, some big rigs in the right lane, a bunch of cars in the left lane. I'm in the center lane. As we're going down this hill, at the bottom of the hill, there are big rigs, these 18-wheeler trucks, stuck because they couldn't make it up the next hill. They're just spinning tires. They can't make it up, so they're blocking traffic. So wreckers are having to pull these big trucks out of the way. So as we're going down this hill, it becomes apparent that right at the bottom of the hill, this 3-lane interstate becomes a 2-lane interstate. So all these trucks that are in the right lane now have to merge over into the left lane. And we don't realize this till we're down the hill. And so this 18-wheeler starts putting his blinker on. He's right next to me and starts kind of moving over, trying to make me move. Well, there's nowhere for me to go because there's cars to my left. And I'm already spinning tires. My speedometer says 55 miles an hour, and I'm like doing 20 miles an hour because I'm just spinning tires trying to keep momentum going to make it up this hill. And so this truck is trying to come over in my lane. And so I realized what's about to happen. If I slow down and let him over in front of me, I'm not going to have enough momentum to get up this hill, then I'm stuck with my kids in this truck in this snowstorm. If I keep going and he doesn't get over, he's stuck. And he knows that too. So he comes over into my lane and starts to bully me and starts to try to push my truck physically almost into the next lane. He gets so close that we are mere inches away, and he's coming over, blowing his horn. I'm blowing my horn. He's coming over. I'm like, look, you're going to just have to hit me. Finally, he realizes, okay, I'm not moving. I'm not intimidated by him. He goes back into his lane and completely stops. And we finally made it all the way up the hill. I get to the top of the hill and look in the rearview mirror, and guess what? He is sitting stuck at the bottom of the hill. I felt bad for him, but I wasn't about to give up my lane just so he could, get to wherever he was going. I had precious cargo in here. I had a live animal. So anyway, that's kind of what one of my horror stories were from trying to keep my reptiles warm one time. Now, if you go on my YouTube channel, SnakesAreUsTV on YouTube, there's a video on there. I don't remember what the video is called, something about alligators on ice or something. And it's a video about my personal alligators that live outside. I've got alligators that live inside the building, the small ones. My big alligators live outside. And I'd say at least once a year here in Georgia, in central Georgia, it kind of freezes over. Where if you have a pond, it's just a sheet of ice. It freezes over, maybe, a couple inches thick, maybe. Not enough to walk on. I learned that when I was 8 years old. I tried walking on ice, holding on next to a dock, and I fell through the ice. Luckily, I had my hand on the dock. My friends were with me. They actually pulled me up. I was like 8 years old, and it was a very stupid thing to do. Got a lot of trouble with that from my dad. Anyway, but it'll ice over here. And the cool thing is alligators do something that caimans and crocodiles don't do. It's called the icing behavior. Basically what happens is as the temperature of the water starts to fall, as it nears freezing, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, for you, in other parts of the world who use Celsius, okay, I don't know anything about Celsius, but I do know this. 0 degrees Celsius is freezing. I do know that. Am I right? Is that correct? Okay, so 32 degrees Fahrenheit is freezing. And just before it begins to freeze, the gators rise to the surface, just their snout, and stick their nose up above the water. And the ice, when it starts to form, freezes around their snout. And we've got video of this on my YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. It's really cool. And these alligators drop their heart rate down really slow, like something like 1 beat per minute or something crazy. And their metabolism slows down, and they just kind of are in this suspended state of barely living. And, it's just amazing the survival capabilities these animals have. Just really, really cool. But that brings me to the first snake that I want to talk about. The first snake I want to talk about regarding temperature actually does something really, really cool. Before I do that, let me go into the chat real quick right here. If you want to be part of the chat, we filmed this live. Oh, Candy's Critters sent us a $10 super chat for propane. Thank you very much, Candy's Critters. That is much, much appreciated. I appreciate that. If you want to be part of the chat, you can join us on YouTube. We record this live every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And man, there's a lot of comments in this chat already. So just go through here and call some names out real quick that join us almost every week. Chris Taylor. Thank you, Chris. Chris texted me right before we started, said he wants to feed one of these gators. I may let you do that at some point, Chris. Painted Rocks is back here. Thank you for joining us. Dennis Buckley, thank you for joining us, Dennis. Dennis is from central Wisconsin. I know Painted Rocks is out of Texas. Chris Taylor is here in Georgia where I live. Who else we got in here? We got Trinity Murray. Trinity Murray, I believe you are from Oregon. She raises eastern hognose snakes. No, I'm sorry. Western hognose snakes is what she raises. So thank you all for joining us here. Candy's Critters is here, of course, as she gave us that super chat. We've got Lisa Easter is here. And it is 30. She said it is 32 degrees here in North Alabama now, getting ready for low. Yeah, so it's going to be cold next week. The low, I think, next week for central Georgia, where I'm at, is 21. Now, some of you in other parts of the country are like laughing at this, but I don't care. I don't like cold weather, and 21 degrees at night is way too cold for me. Okay? So anyway, so we got a lot of people in the chat. Thank you guys for joining us, and we're going to get onto this. We got Dwayne Ray here. Dwayne Ray from Hazard, Kentucky. Thank you for being in here with us, Dwayne. Okay, so getting back to it. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to cold weather is the garter snake, specifically the red-sided garter snake. Now, one thing that I do here in Georgia that I think is really cool is we have a service where people can send photos in to us for identification. And sometimes we'll get 100+ photos per day for ID. I've got all the responses pre-programmed out, so I can just hit a button, and I personally identify these snakes. I hit a button, it goes back and tells the person all about the snake and what it is. But what's cool about that for me is the fact that when springtime finally comes and temperatures start to come up, people start sending photos of snakes. So I'm able to see at what point snakes here where I live start coming out, start emerging, and which species of snakes start showing up first. And I think it's really cool because what I normally see are brown snakes, Decay's brown snakes. Those usually show up very early. Garter snakes, of course, eastern garter snakes, and we're about to talk about the red-sided garter snake. We have eastern garter snakes here in Georgia. We don't have red-sided garter snakes here, but garter snakes show up pretty quick, and as well as rat snakes. And then the first venomous snake we see is a little bit later, maybe a month or so after those show up, is the copperhead. That's the one I normally start seeing first. Anyway, so that's cool to be able to see that. Now, the red-sided garter snake, these are the snakes that, if you've ever seen snakes emerge from winter, and they are, hundreds of them, sometimes even thousands of these snakes, just, crawling all over each other, trying to come out of their den after spending the winter there. Those garter snakes are really cool. Now, before I go into what I want to say about the snake, let me mention something else, because I want to make sure our terms and the words that I use are understood. And if you're a snake person, you'll know this. If you're not, this may be something new for you. So when we talk about reptiles and we talk about them hibernating, well, technically they don't really exactly hibernate, okay? It's hibernation is more kind of like what you would think of mammals and bears kind of hibernate in the winter. Reptiles do something, it's a form of hibernation, but we actually call it brumation. So brumation is determined by reptiles when the temperature reaches a certain low. And this is different for different reptiles. Different lizards, snakes, alligators, turtles, tortoises, all have different temperatures at which they will maybe go into brumation. Some reptiles don't brumate at all. If they're in an area of the world where it's warm all year, they're active all year. But animals that live like here in the southeastern U.S., especially in central Georgia where I live, most of them brumate, which means they have to find a place to get hidden where they're below the frost line where they won't freeze. If you're going to dig, a ditch here in Georgia to bury a piping for plumbing, you're burying some plumbing lines, you can't do that 6 inches deep or even 12 inches deep. You have to go much deeper than that. And the reason you're trying to get down below the frost line, down below where even the ground itself will freeze, because you don't want the water pipe in the ground to freeze. So it has to be pretty deep. So the reptiles have to do that too. They have to get down somewhere below where they won't freeze to death, okay? At least some of them do. And that's called brumation. And then you can have in the summertime, if it's really, really hot and it's too hot to be out, so hot they can't just come out even for days. They do what's called estivation, where they kind of maybe dig in the mud or dig underground and get places where they can stay cooler and not get too hot, okay? Now, speaking of animals getting too hot, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people have this misconception that snakes like it hot. And now they do like to be warm, but one thing I get often is I will hand a kid a snake or even an adult, a pet snake to hold, and they'll say, wow, I didn't think it would feel this way. He actually kind of feels cold. Well, if you think of why it feels cold, okay, your body temperature, if you're healthy, is about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? So if you touch an object, especially like a metal object like this, and if this object is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, it feels just like our skin. But if it's any degree below that, if it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit, it kind of feels cool to us, because 90 degrees sounds hot, but it's more than 8 degrees cooler than our body temperature. So if we touch something that's 80 degrees, I touch this, that 80 degrees feels cold, okay? So if a snake is, 78 or 80 degrees, which is, not a bad temperature for our native snakes here in Georgia, and you touch that snake, well, to your hand, it feels like it's cold. And people say, oh, well, I guess it's cold because they're cold-blooded. But I thought snakes like to be hot. I think they like to be warm. Well, what they'll do is they do have to warm their body temperature up to get to a certain temperature to where they can be comfortable and can be warm. So red-sided garter snakes, these snakes are really cool. One thing that these snakes do is when they are spending the winter and they're brumating inside their den, okay, and it comes time for them to emerge for spring. And oftentimes there may still be snow on the ground when this happens. Snow's still on the ground in some cases, but the temperature's coming up enough, the sun's out, they can warm up, and they want to come out and they'll get a drink of water, and they start pretty quickly looking for a few things. They're looking for water, maybe even looking for food as it gets a little bit warmer, but they're also looking really quickly to mate because the females are going to mate with, they're only going to mate once this whole year. And if this male here misses out, well, he misses out. He gets one shot at this, and there's hundreds of other males he's competing with. So imagine you have all these garter snakes emerging, okay? And they come out there and they'll lay in the sun. Sometimes laying on the snow in the sun is enough to kind of warm them up because these garter snakes are kind of really dark colors. Those dark colors help them warm up a lot quicker. And they start to warm up. And once their body temperature reaches a certain level, they can start to then pursue the female. Well, if a male garter snake comes out of the den maybe a little bit later than he should have, okay, and there's all these other hundreds of garter snakes out here, well, he's going to have to spend a lot more time warming up. They already have a head start on him. So what can this garter snake do to warm up quicker than they warmed up? This garter snake has a trick. What this male garter snake can do is release a pheromone that tricks the other male garter snakes into believing that it is a female. Isn't that crazy? And all these male garter snakes, oh, look, I smell her. There's a girl over here. Let's go over here. And all these male garter snakes come over here trying to get her attention and trying to get her to mate. But it's not. It's just a boy garter snake. And they climb all over this male garter snake trying to say, hey, do you like me? Do you like me? They're flicking their tongue. They're rubbing their head all over the snake. And as they're doing that, guess what? Their body temperature is warming up this garter snake. And so when that body temperature is warm enough, this garter snake, pretending to be a girl, takes off and gets in pursuit and gets in the fight with the other ones to pursue that female for mating, which is absolutely amazing. It is an amazing thing. Now, I mentioned one thing a while ago. I mentioned when I talk about this garter snake that when it's out there, it warms up in the sun because garter snakes have that darker black color on them sometimes. And that reminds me of timber rattlesnakes. Now, people often will refer to canebrake rattlesnakes or timber rattlesnakes. And traditionally speaking, the canebrake rattlesnake, Crotalus atricaudatus, was a subspecies of the timber rattlesnake, Crotalus horridus. And they kind of live in different areas. They look different. One gets bigger than the other one. The venom composition is even different, okay? And but through DNA testing, scientists basically said, well, genetically they're the same thing. So they did away with the name canebrake, and they reclassified them all as timber rattlesnakes. So even though they're technically known as timbers, if you say canebrake, I know exactly what you're talking about because sometimes I call them canebrakes too. But if you look at a timber rattlesnake, let's say from New York State or Pennsylvania, you can find a couple of different ones. You can find the yellow phase timber rattlesnake, or you can find the black phase timber rattlesnake. And then down here in Georgia, if you find a timber rattlesnake and you look at that one, it's going to look a lot different than the one you find up north, okay? The ones up north are usually darker, and that's because it doesn't get as warm up north as it does here. So a darker snake absorbs more heat, warms up quicker to be able to pursue food and mate and whatever it's got to do. Now, because we have longer summers down here, it's warmer for a longer period of time here. There's a longer time throughout the year that timber rattlesnakes can eat. So because they have a longer period in 1 year to eat than the northern timbers do, then they get bigger down here. So you can find bigger timber rattlesnakes in Georgia than you can up north. There's a lot of differences, even differences with, like I said, some of their venoms, and especially once you get around the Georgia, Florida line down there. Some of those venoms, may be more potent, they're thinking. And it kind of makes sense. If you have a rattlesnake that gets bigger and it needs to eat bigger prey and needs more potent venom maybe to kill that prey. So it all kind of works together. So really, really cool thing there about those guys. Now, another thing that I think is really, really interesting is this next point. And I really love this truck and trailer right here. Just play on this thing. So I need to fix where it actually hooks onto that truck where I can drive it around and pull it. But and the door is actually open on this. So the real trailer, the ramp lets down. That's the exit ramp where people go out, and then the back of it back here somehow this thing is stuck. Anyway, the back door, that's the entrance. Anyway, really cool little thing there. But all right, before we get to this next part, which I think is very interesting, which may actually surprise some of you when it comes to reptiles as far as temperature goes. Let's get back right here to the chat. Okay, so I said Painted Rocks. I said you were in Texas. You said no, you're in Michigan. Are you sure? Are you sure you're in Michigan? I thought you were in Texas. You'd probably know better than I would, okay? So Dwayne Ray, so you keep snakes. He said, I've got anything from boas to rattlesnakes. Trinity Mercy is definitely Westerns. Easterns are a lot harder to, yes, I've kept Easterns in captivity. They are much harder, especially if you want to get them to eat mice. If you got a steady supply of toads, probably keep you some Eastern hognose snakes there. Let's see here. Billy T joined us in the chat, says, I collected garters many years ago, and he is in, did you collect them in Winnipeg, Manitoba, or is that where you live, is in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada? So, very cool. All right, so the other thing I want to say is, I think is really interesting, is like, you ever seen, this is a good way to explain to people about reptiles and temperature. You ever seen like turtles out in a pond sitting on a log all lined up, I always ask people, why are those turtles sitting on that log? Like, well, they're sitting there to get the sun, right? Well, yeah. Why are they sitting there to get the sun? Well, because they want to warm up. Yeah, they want to warm up. Okay, but why are they wanting to warm up? Well, because it feels good. Well, yeah, it does feel good, but there's a little bit more to it. What specifically, why are they trying to warm up, and why do they have to warm up? What does it do for them? Well, it does several things. It helps their muscles to work better. They can actually move around, okay? And it does something else too. It actually helps to activate the enzymes in their gut to basically digest their food. For instance, if you take a snake and you feed it a mouse, and you have to have the snake at a certain temperature for him to even decide to want to eat the mouse. If it's really cold, the snake's not going to eat the mouse. He knows he can't digest it. But if it's warm enough and he eats the mouse, he has to stay warm and maybe even go lay in the sun somewhere, try to warm his body temperature up so the enzymes are more active in his gut and can digest the food. That's why when you have these turtles that are in this river, this pond, and the water's pretty cold in this creek or stream or whatever it is, and they're eating food, they get out of this cold water onto these logs, and they're laying in the sun, and they even stretch their legs out. You'll see them with their legs all stretched out, and they're trying to maximize how much sun they're absorbing because they get vitamin D from the sun, but also as the temperature warms them up, it activates the enzymes for them to be able to digest their food. So on the flip side, if you have that snake and you feed it the mouse and it's nice and warm and it's the right temperature, then all of a sudden you drastically lower the temperature on that snake, what's going to happen? Well, if the snake doesn't regurgitate it, doesn't throw it up, then the animal's not going to digest in its stomach. It's going to rot in the snake's stomach and kill the snake. So they have to have the temperature requirements there for that specifically. Okay. So Candy's Critters, you're saying you are in Texas? What are you talking about? Michigan. Okay. Candy, she says, yes, I am in Texas. Okay. I thought you were in Texas. All right. Now, let's see here. Okay, I'm just reading the chat here. Like I said, if you want to join the chat, it's on YouTube, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. every Thursday on SnakesAreUsTV on YouTube. Okay, so this other thing that I want to cover that I think is actually really kind of cool is this. when we talk about reptiles, and now I had to write this down because I wanted to take a note on this so I give you the definition correctly, because I want to make sure I'm explaining this where you get it. And if you're a reptile person, you probably already know this. A couple of you might not know this though. So I think this is really cool. Okay. So when we talk about reptiles, we know that they are cold-blooded, okay? And cold-blooded, what it basically means is, it doesn't mean their blood is cold. I kind of don't even like the name cold-blooded because it kind of gives you an idea about snakes that's not true, okay? A better term than calling a reptile cold-blooded might be the term ectothermic. Ectothermic, okay? So ectothermic is basically what amphibians and reptiles are. So here's a definition of ectothermic, an ectotherm animal. An ectotherm is an organism whose body temperature is largely determined by heat exchange with its surroundings, okay? So basically, if a snake is over here in the shade, his body temperature is going to be cooler than if he goes and lays on this rock that's in the sun. The rock is warm that's under him, and the sun's on top of him, so he's getting warm from the top and the bottom here, okay? All right. So these ectotherms, they do not produce and retain enough metabolic heat to elevate its body temperature above the ambient temperature, okay, but it may use behavioral mechanisms to regulate body temperature. These behavioral mechanisms, like what I just said, basically it'll crawl over here out of the shade, laying the sun, and that will raise up its body temperature, okay? So, warm-blooded humans, our metabolism, we're burning energy and we're creating our own heat. So we're not cold-blooded. Now, then you have something that's called, so that's ectothermic, okay? This is where it gets cool. This is cool. Then you have endothermic. Endothermic, think of it this way. Ecto is exit, outside temperatures. Endothermic is inside, an internal temperature that warms you up, okay? So endothermic is an organism whose body temperature is largely determined by heat exchange with its surroundings. It does, what? Okay. Guess what I did? God, I feel so stupid. I copied the same definition for ectothermic as a different endothermic. These are two different things, and they have the same definition. I typed them on here this way. I copied and pasted. Anyway, thankfully, I know what the definition of endothermic is. I can tell you, even though I have the wrong one here. Okay, ectothermic gets their temperature from the outside, and they go lay in the sun and warm up. Endothermic is basically what you are. So you create your own body temperature. Now, of course, you can go get in the sun too and warm up some, but you largely create your own body's temperature from the inside out, okay? Here's the cool thing. So when we talk about reptiles, are reptiles ectothermic or are they endothermic? What do you think? Well, they're ectothermic, except for some of them are kind of both. This is cool. So here in Georgia, we have an invasive lizard. It has actually got a couple invasive lizards. One is the Mediterranean gecko. They started showing up in the early 1900s or something down in the Florida Keys or Miami with these shipping containers coming over from the Mediterranean. And now we see them all the time coming in the port of Savannah on these cargo trailers. They get put on the 18-wheelers. They get transported all over Georgia in the southeast. And these little tiny Mediterranean geckos get out and live all in the woods and are, or not in the woods, but usually around buildings and structures where there's outside lights at night that attract, insects. And they're not really thought that we know of to be dangerous or to cause any problem in the ecosystem. But we have these in Georgia now. But we also have another lizard that is invasive that does cause a problem that does not need to be in Georgia, that environmentalists are kind of worried about, and that is the tegu, specifically the black and white tegu. The black and white tegu was actually recently restricted here in Georgia. If you already have one as a pet, you can keep it if you get a license to keep it, and you have to have it microchipped. You can't breed it, and when that lizard dies, you can't get another one. That's the current state of Georgia with black and white tegus. Now the problem is there's a area of Georgia, a couple counties. I want to say it's a 240 square mile area where these tegus are invasive, and there's been several of them found living there. And people were like, well, maybe it's going to get cold enough to where it'll just kind of kill them off, because there's been some temperatures in those areas to where it's below freezing, below freezing there. And you would think something below freezing would freeze a reptile and kill it. But tegus are endothermic. What that means is they have the capability to generate their own body heat, okay? And they can actually raise their own body temperature sometimes 5 or 6, 7 degrees above the temperature that's in the air around them. And that's usually more than enough to survive. If it gets to be, say it gets to be, 27, 28 degrees below freezing Fahrenheit, well, the tegu can raise his body temperature up above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which is freezing, and survive. That's just absolutely amazing to me. But the weird thing is the tegu is not the only animal that can do it. It's not the only reptile, that can do it. Okay, there's more. Another one is certain lizards. So monitor lizards, not all, but some monitor lizards like the Komodo dragon. Everybody's heard of the Komodo dragon, right? They can generate metabolic heat to maintain body temperatures that are higher than the ambient temperature around them, okay? There's also been documentation of the spiny-tailed iguana being able to do the same thing to some degree. Some of these are better than others at doing this. Another one that is interesting is the leatherback sea turtle. The leatherback sea turtle has been known to raise its body temperature and have a higher body temperature than the surrounding water, basically due to its large size and the large layer of fat, which provides some capability of raising that body temperature. So, for if you're fat, you can be warm. Okay, maybe that's why. Maybe that's why I'm hot natured. Okay. Anyway, so and there's a snake that does it as well. So I've known this for a long time. I've always thought this was really cool. And you can go on YouTube and look up videos of this happening, and it's really cool to watch this. Some pythons, like I think Burmese pythons are one, maybe reticulated pythons, I think can do it. But basically what will happen is these pythons lay eggs, okay? They'll lay a clutch of eggs, and they'll wrap their body around their clutch of eggs, and they kind of start having muscle contractions, I guess you'd say. And these muscle contractions that are minor but continuous generate body heat, which then warms the eggs to raise them so they can incubate their eggs. That's absolutely crazy that they can do that. That is absolutely insane. So, we're talking about reptiles and all the things that they can do, and it just amazed me because it's one thing that seems to me is the more I learn about reptiles, the more I learn how much I don't know. The more I realize how much I don't know. Every new fact you learn opens up another 10 questions that you have to answer. So it's so cool learning about these things that God created. It's absolutely amazing, all these things that he's done. So one more thing we're going to cover in just a minute. But before we do that, let's jump over to our chat here and see if you guys have anything to say in the chat. People who keep reptiles like I do, we often use our reptiles in the wintertime, so we don't cool all of our reptiles down. Sometimes we'll use them all year. We don't do as many programs in the wintertime, but most of my reptiles, they'll kind of eat all year long. If we have a snake, say we get a rattlesnake in that couldn't be relocated, we end up keeping a rattlesnake and it came from the wild. That first year it comes in, that winter, it probably is not going to eat a whole lot. It's just used to, this time of year where I don't eat, and that's just kind of what they do. Kind of like my alligators, my big alligators out here, when the temperature starts to drop, they stop eating. And that typically happens, I want to say usually here in Georgia, it's around sometime in November, maybe the beginning of November, mid-November. The temperature's too low to where if I feed them, they can't digest the food. So usually around November, I stop feeding my outdoor gators. They don't eat for all of November, December, January, February, and sometimes not until April. So usually about at least 4 months, if not 5 months, my outside gators don't eat any single thing at all. And then once the temperature's high enough, they kind of come out, they're crawling around, and they're able to eat. And even in the wintertime here, though, even in the winter, I can go out here on a sunny day in January, and if it's not freezing cold and windy, my alligators will be out of the water, laying out in the sun in January, basking. As a matter of fact, if you want to go look this up, there is an alligator farm in Colorado. And on their website, their Facebook page, they have photos of their gators laying out sunning in the snow. Okay, so it's pretty amazing what these animals are capable of doing. And speaking of January, here in Georgia, did you guys know there's a snake in Georgia that its breeding season is January? I mean, typically this time of year, this is their breeding season, and that snake is the emperor of the forest, the eastern indigo snake, the largest non-venomous snake in North America. They get 8 foot plus, and they're jet black. And because they're black in the wintertime, the sun's able to warm them up enough where they can be active and go search for mates and actually breed in the wintertime. That's really, snakes are not all that we normally think of when we're talking about temperature, and they don't like it hot like we think they like it hot. So thank you guys all here in the chat. Nature Nut, glad to see you here. Nature Nut is from South Carolina. And if I don't read your comment during the chat, I do go back and read these later. I'll go back and read these chats. If you want to see the chat, you have to go to our YouTube channel and then click on the live tab, and then you can see the live unedited version of this podcast there and read some of these chats. Yes, so Trinity Murray, I meant to mention that. She just put in the chat that 2025 is the year of the snake. Now, I am not into astrology. My birthday is in January. I'm a Capricorn. I don't know what that means. I don't care what it means. I don't care about the Chinese signs of the year of the snake, the year of the horse, all this Chinese zodiac stuff. I don't believe in it. I don't care about it. However, it is the year of the snake, which that in itself to me is cool. So I like that. So 2025 is in the Chinese calendar, the year of the snake. That is pretty amazing. Okay. So last thing I want to tell you guys, speaking of temperature, there was some things I was, thinking about and contemplating this week. And as I was getting ready to prepare this, I was like, it'd actually be worth talking about when I go on the podcast tonight is temperature and cold. So the title of this episode is Cold. And if you are a cold-hearted person, maybe you're not a cold-hearted person. Maybe you're just going through a cold-hearted season in your life. And maybe, with Christmas just passing, the New Year's here, people start to self-reflect on themselves a whole lot in their life. And when you start doing that, it can really get you down, And so this time of year, there's a lot of depression in people. And I think part of that is just because of how gloomy it is outside. It gets dark at 4:00 in the afternoon. There's no leaves on the trees. It's just, that's wintertime for you. But, with it being a new year, that can get people depressed and all that stuff. So if you are feeling like you're in a cold-hearted season of your life, what I would suggest you do is stop focusing on the problem, which is usually you. Okay. What I mean by that is we're usually the problem because we're focusing on ourselves. We're focusing on our own problems. So we become depressed. We become sad. We become lonely. And then when you start doing that, and you start feeling those feelings, that causes pain. Well, in your brain, the opposite of pain to your brain is pleasure. And so your brain wants to stop feeling pain. It wants to feel pleasure. It doesn't want to feel lonely. It doesn't want to feel sad. It doesn't want to feel depressed. It wants to have this pain go away. It wants to feel pleasure. And so the problem, though, with seeking pleasure is pleasure releases dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical in your brain. And the problem with dopamine, now it's necessary, but the problem when you get too much dopamine from seeking pleasure is that dopamine actually suppresses serotonin. Well, so what? Who cares? Who cares about what I'm even talking about right now? Well, if you understand what dopamine and serotonin is and how they work, then it might affect you. It might help you to know this. So from dopamine comes pleasure, okay? And pleasure is always short-lived. Pleasure comes from a lot of things: drugs and alcohol, overeating, doom scrolling on your phone, looking at video after video after video. Look at this video, but not all the other videos. But looking at these, the YouTube shorts and the the Instagram reels, and just over and over and over, and then you realize, I'm on these social media sites, and I didn't know I was looking at these videos for 2 hours now, and you're like stuck in it. You want to get out of it. And that's because you have a dopamine addiction. That's exactly what it is. And the extremes of any type of pleasure you seek, the extremes of it all lead to addiction in some form, okay? Now, serotonin, on the other hand, is very different. Serotonin does not result in pleasure. Serotonin produces happiness, okay? The results of dopamine can be addictive. Pleasure, the things that bring you pleasure, those things can be addictive. But there's no addictive properties. You don't ever see anybody that, oh yeah, he's addicted to happiness. You can't get addicted to happiness, and you can't get addicted to the things that bring happiness. But when you start looking at yourself doing this unhealthy introspection, and you get frustrated by all the circumstances that you're struggling to deal with, what I want you to do is start just overlooking your problems. Temporarily, of course, okay? You have to deal with your problems, but just temporarily, when it gets too much, start trying to overlook them somewhat, and stop just looking out for your own interest and being so self-reflective of yourself that you get so bogged down in how you're feeling about all this stuff, and instead do something different. Philippians 2:4 says, don't look out for your own interests, but take interest in others too, okay? So begin today. That's what I want you to do. I want you to begin looking specifically, like actively looking in your life for people or someone that you can help. It could be something big, like paying for somebody's groceries, okay? It could be something like really small, like an encouraging note, that you write to somebody. And that can mean a lot to a person, because you have to understand dopamine that produces pleasure comes by you taking something. Serotonin that produces happiness comes to you by giving something. Okay? So whatever it is that you decide to do, what I want you to understand more than anything, whatever it is that you decide to do, is know that God can begin to heal you as he heals others through you. And if you want to know more about what I'm talking about, go and look up dopamine addictions versus serotonin. And I know I just bring this up because it's such a big thing this time of year. Right here with all these holidays together, you got Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all this stuff together. And this is a big, sad part of the year for so many people. But there's things that you can do about it. So I hope that helps you guys, and hope it helps you get rid of your cold heart. Okay. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for joining me here tonight on the SnakesAreUsTV podcast. This has been episode number 19. Can't believe we're at episode 19. I'll be back next week for episode number 20. And also right now, we have started putting all these episodes. We started recording all these on YouTube. And right now, if you want to go find these, you can actually go find these on wherever you listen to podcasts. So we're on Spotify. We are on Apple Music. We're on Amazon Music. We're on YouTube Music. We're on all these other streaming platforms. So if you listen to podcasts, you can go find us on those podcasts right now, tonight, as soon as you get off this video. So thank you guys for joining us. And one last thing I forgot to tell you, Jesus loves you, and so do I. You guys have a great night.